All right, let's rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, to our second budget meeting. You should have received the minutes from the July 15th budget workshop. If so,
Move for approval.
thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from last week's budget meeting. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I'll pass this around for signature. All right, you should all have an agenda. We're going to stick to that fairly closely, but let's see. So, from our conversation last week, we talked about putting some definition around what we want the general fund reserves to be at the end of 2021. So you all have, or will have the revenue and expenditure projections for the general fund. You remember we looked at this last year, and we're on track at the moment to end up with a balance of just over $9 million, $9,063,000. That is down from where we ended up at the end of 2020, which was $10,082,000. That is by design. As you all will remember, we opted to spend some of our reserves on construction projects, capital equipment purchases, and we used some to invest in the health insurance program to bring that balance up. So, one of the issues we'll face for this year is, in order to be able to purchase some of the capital equipment that has been requested by department heads, we may need to again dip into our general fund reserves to fund some of those. Now, obviously, there are alternatives. There are other funds, and we'll talk about those as we go by. But my main concern as we get started in the budget process is to talk about a minimum level of reserve funding that we want to have going into or end up with at the end of 2021. We have grown that reserve over time. 10 years ago, we started to build it towards $6 million. As the total budget has increased over the years, we moved that up to $7 million. And that level of reserves allows us to get through to the June settlement of property taxes without having to borrow. So that's kind of been the target over the years. I personally think we ought to try to stick at around the $8 million range now, given the growth of the budget just through inflation and increases in the most significant component of our budget, which is personnel costs. The number that we need to get through to June settlement varies a little bit depending on the calendar, how many pay periods there are between January and and settlement. You know, some months have 3 pay periods, some have 2. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that with the times being somewhat uncertain, I would rather be a little more conservative, to be honest with you. So if we can stay in that $8 or $9 million range, I certainly would think that would be better than to take our chances with a lower figure.
Anyone else?
I would probably have to look at the $8 million mark as we look at some of our requests and prioritizing some of those needs, separating the ongoing dollars versus the one-time expenses. So as we look and consider, for example, our 4,000s, you know, being one-time expenses, and being careful with our reoccurring and what kind of dollars do we have if we can capture our reserves and help offset the overall general budget.
I'll concur with what the other 2 speakers that have spoken so far. I will agree with them.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else?
I'm okay with that $8 to $9 million. I don't want to go below 8. I don't feel like.
Okay. Tony?
I don't really want to go below 8.5 and would prefer it be closer to 9.
That's what I was thinking, more than 8, just because we don't know what next year holds. We may not have those one-time dollars we need next year. We're not sure about all that yet.
All right. So I think keep those thoughts in mind as we start getting into the actual requests for 4,000 accounts.
Right.
There are obviously some variables involved in where we end up at the end of this year, those including how much we departments spend between now and then. You know, if there are some savings to be had, people are frugal in their expenditures. That number could be above the $9 million at the end of this year. The other element, and I'm going to drop down to number 1D on your agenda where it says the DOC payment. Remember that last year the state began a new system of reimbursement for level 6 felons that were incarcerated in the county jails, as opposed to having in the past been sent to the Department of Corrections. They actually even increased the rate of reimbursement a little bit. It had been $35, went to $37.50, and I think next year it'll go to $40. So, but they started paying that in a lump sum payment. So last year in July, we received $677,000 as that lump sum payment for the then upcoming year. Kim and I have discussed this. We've talked to DLGF, and they referred us to the state auditor's office. We have not received word back from them on timing of that payment or the amount of that payment. If you'll recall, it's supposedly based on an average number of prisoners that are housed in your county. So on this form, there is nothing included for that one-time annual payment. We assume that it will be coming. We don't know when. We don't know the exact amount. But if it's on track, it shouldn't be much less than the $677,000 from last year, that as far as we can determine. We'll let you know when we hear a response to that, but that in and of itself would change this number from 9 million at the end of the year to over 9.5 million at the end of the year. So, all other things being equal. So just a little bit more information for you as we go forward.
How did we come out on that last year? Like, did we have less or more prisoners than?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have the answer to that.
Less money this year coming into it. Less prisoners asked for the sheriff.
I'm sorry?
It was actually less money, Jeff, than what we had received in the past for the jail.
Okay. Okay, on to potential new monies for 2021. So the next sheet is a calculation that goes a little more in depth than our conversation last week. And I want to review this again because I want you all to consider it. Keep in mind that really Kim and I put this together, and I really want you guys to look at it carefully and let me know if you think we've miscalculated in any way. We have not yet received any estimates from the Department of Local Government and Finance, and we know that we will not receive any final numbers until October. But our thinking is that the general fund should, with a growth quotient of 4.2, the general fund should, the property taxes minus Cumcap should generate new levy of $887,000. We receive, because of the tax caps, we collect about 83% of that, the other 17% being the tax cap credit that we no longer collect because it's what's in excess of the 1%, 2%, or 3% restrictions on the levy. So that 83% then equates to $736,000. We are estimating, and this is where there's some significant room for error. So we're estimating a 10% reduction for 2021 in income tax, and that's loosely based on the timing of the calculation from the state, which is skewed so that we've collected most of the money that would be part of 2021's income tax revenue before COVID hit. When COVID hit, the unemployment rate went up dramatically, as you all know. And it's subsequently come down a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that tax collection would stabilize without going into exhaustive review of the actual number of people in the workforce, how many people actually went back to work as opposed to stopped looking for work, and so on. Anyway, we're estimating a 10% reduction, which would be $380,000 off of the $3.8 million that we are receiving for this year. That leaves $356,000 minus the $47,761 that is being collected in the Cum Bridge and Cum Court funds, which leaves a net in the general fund of $308,000. I think for our purposes, we round that to about $300,000 of new money, and we're somewhere in the ballpark if my calculations are anywhere close to being accurate. So as you will recall, The Courthouse Fund and the Bridge Fund are both funds that are within the levy. So that, with the general fund and the health fund, make up the levy, and Cumcap Development is the one fund that's outside of the levy, the one property tax fund for the county that's outside the levy. So again, bottom line is here in these calculations, roughly $300,000 in new dollars, net dollars, based on increased property tax collection because of the growth quotient increase and reduced income tax collection based on unemployment rate. Okay? Please review that and over the next several days share your thoughts with me as we move forward with the budget process. Any questions or comments right now? If not, the next item is account balances for budgeted funds. So you've got a sheet here. And these are as of July 20th of this year. So County General, we've got the beginning balance. Now this is January 1st to July 20th.
Yes.
All right, and so the ending balance as of July 20th, which is obviously after the spring settlement, was $8,827,000. The next fund is Wayne County Edit. Started out at $3.4 million, and as of this week we're at $3.6 million. Now, reminder that this is the balance in the fund. It does not mean that that those dollars are not already budgeted, already appropriated, and likely to be spent between now and the end of the year. But this is the current balance. The Bridge Fund is currently at $5 million. Cumcap, $170,000. The Courthouse is a negative $4,000. The Health Department has $435,000. I'll skip over the highway numbers. Let's go down to the jail bond debt service is at $4.6 million. Do you know if the final payment has been made yet?
I made the final payment, well, I made the payment for July, but we have not received a bill for the extras yet.
The extras?
Yeah, any other fees that were supposed to be paid, we have not received anything for that yet.
Okay, but those would be less than the
Yes.
last payment. So just a reminder that at our workshop in August, Ron will be with us with an ordinance to adopt to rebalance the income tax, to reduce it by that 0.25% that has been allocated to the jail bond fund. So that 0.25% will come off this fall. And the balance there, and again, there's $4.6 million currently in that account, but a significant amount of that has been committed to the final package of construction projects in the jail. Let's see, what else? The consolidated edit fund has $4.3 million. The 4D accounts are the last three on the chart there. The prosecutor's new 4D has 52,000. The clerk's old 4D is 55,000, and their new 4D is 239,000. So keep in mind on the clerk, two separate 4D accounts. The old 4D, which is Fund 8898, has far fewer strings attached to how it can be spent than the new Clerk 4D, which is Fund 8899. So those dollars, 239,000, have to be spent for 4D purposes.
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, the old clerk 4D, when that 55,000 is gone, it's
It will be gone. That fund will go away, correct. That's all that's left from that old account. No further collections go into that. Okay, so do that to give you some sense of the fund balances that we have at our disposal. Yes,
Commissary.
ma'am. I'm sorry?
Did you want commissary?
Oh, sure. Commissary is the next page.
That is coming. Yeah.
Oh, you got it? Okay. So this is from the most recent report from the sheriff on the Commissary Fund, and as of June 30th, there's $245,000 available there. Again, I even spoke incorrectly there. There's a balance of $245,000. That does not mean that all or part of that is not already committed to something. It means that is the current balance in that fund, nothing more. Historically, the sheriffs have tried to not spend much more than they bring in a year, so that they always have a balance of somewhere around $250,000. You can see there from the list of what they spend that money on. A big chunk of it goes to support the commissary itself, buying supplies and things for the commissary. But we have frequently asked the sheriff, when he's had a request of us for funding, we've asked him to participate in that cost, and that's frequently through the Commissary Fund. Questions on that? Okay. So, changes to the 2021 budget. You heard a number of those requests last week. There aren't all that many. There are a couple that we did not include in our conversations last week. So this is a listing of the general fund, and the office is listed, and next to that, if it says no changes, they submitted the same 2020 budget for 2021. If there are changes, those are filled in there. So the total increase that has been requested is $1,197,030, and $1,049,000 of that comes from the council budget, where I put in an extra $1 million for advertising purposes. You'll recall when we advertise the budget, once we advertise a budget, we cannot go higher than that. And so we always try to have little bit of wiggle room in the advertisement so that we can calculate, is there any money available for raises? So this is money that I put in the initial budget so that we have some room to move on, primarily on two fronts. One is if there's any money available for raises, and two is what, if anything, will the requirements be to fully fund our health insurance program. Beyond that, there's not a lot of need in terms of requests for ongoing, recurring budget increases. So let's just quickly go down through those. You remember the election board asked for a $10,000 increase. We've talked that over. We asked that the clerk give us a revised budget, in part at least because there is no election next year. Having said that, we certainly need to keep in mind that even though there's no election next year in 2021, there is one in 2022. So anything we might take out of that budget in 2022, it will have to be put back in with recurring dollars. While changes to that line item are certainly possible, we need to think through and whether if we reduce that line item, we'll be in a position to increase it again the following year. So if we do reduce it, it may be prudent to use those dollars for some kind of one-time expenditure rather than a recurring expenditure. Plan Commission asked for an increase of $8,640. That is in their contractual line, and that is for the software that will allow for online permitting. So if you'll recall, we authorized expenditures of $50,000 to purchase that software. It's in progress. They're making some progress. It will also allow other departments, not just the building inspector and plan commission, but for example, public health would be able to use that software to do online ordering and purchasing of a birth certificate, for example, or a death certificate. So it's not limited to just the planning department. So for that reason, it occurs to me that expenditure might be better maintained in IT, and there might be some wiggle room in what has been their 4,000 line item to accommodate that additional expenditure, but that's what that request is about. Court services we talked about briefly last week, $110,000 split between pauper attorney, medical testing, and criminal appeals. And then finally, the conversation we had with the probation department about salary increases. And keep in mind that for many years now, we have been told by the state what the minimum salaries are in the probation department for the probation officers. We, several years ago, agreed to a program of paying for those salary increases based on the minimum salary set by the Supreme Court, isn't it, Bob?
Yes.
Plus 2%. And that 2% was an acknowledgement that that our probation staff works 40 hours a week. Many departments don't work 40 hours a week. It also was, I think, an attempt to slow down the turnover in staff, which many years ago there was significant turnover, and that is not near the problem that it once was. But having said that, it's something that needs to be considered if, for example, we're not able to give raises to the rest of our staff. Do we need to make modifications to that agreement, at least temporarily, for the people in the probation office? Again, just thinking out loud of how do we do this? How do we accommodate the increases? You'll also recall that that Corey asked that we increase the general fund share of the salary from $45,000 and moving it up to $50,000 for each of the probation officers to, I think his words were, to preserve the PUF fund, PUF being the probation user fees. So the collections in the probation user fees have been in decline for a number of years and are continuing in that direction. Those are the only changes that were requested in the general fund. And again, I would remind you that just because a department did not request any increases doesn't necessarily mean that the council can't review their budget and potentially make some decreases or increases for that matter, but I think the increases are less likely. There's at the bottom some additional funds that we budget, and of those funds, the significant increases, $725,000 in the bridge fund, and that's essentially all for bridge construction, and $222,000 increase in local road and street. And then in the 911 fund, an increase of $10,000 to the contractual line item, and I believe that is for the new GIS software that goes with the dispatch software.
The annual contract?
Yes. So that's where we're at with the requests. Questions, comments, thoughts? Anybody hear a good joke? All right. If there are no questions or comments, let's move on to the capital purchase requests. And we did get a number from the sheriff on the body cameras, and you'll have some information here in a minute. But that total number is $136,000. Of that amount, $35,000 is, I think it was $35,000, $32,000, $32,500 is for warranties for 5 years, 3 years, sorry. 3-year hardware and software warranty. Seems to me like Ron has advised us in the past that we cannot pay in advance for services not yet rendered. So I think we have stayed away from. You'll get it. As soon as Roger
No, I was
passes it
asleep when
down.
you got here. As soon as I wake up here.
So,
I want to be
see,
a nice guy.
he's got his mask up over his nose, so he's not getting enough oxygen or something.
That's it, yeah.
There you go. Are there?
Thank you.
You have the you have the sheet, the 4,000 sheet. You guys have these?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pass those down, there we go. Now you got everything. Okay. So, $6,000, this is from EMA, $6,000 for batteries, $515,000 for a new radio system, which they say absolutely needs to be replaced no later than very early in 2022. Apparently that it's not possible to get spare parts and to maintain that system. The building commission would like a truck for $30,000. Highway is again requesting $150,000 for trucks. And you saw last week the replacement plan for vehicles in the highway department. And then the sheriff, $136,000 for body cameras and the warranty, and then $200,000 for cars. And there's been some suggestion on the cars that they might just have to do without cars or extend the mileage from 100,000 to 125,000. The sheriff has assured me a number of times that he must have that $200,000 for cars. This is one of his bubble years where he needs to replace 8 cars. And he makes the argument that due to the insurance risks of driving those cars beyond 100,000 miles, the insurance company has recommended that they replace them no later than 100,000 miles. So I know that many of us have differing opinions on that. I'm passing along those arguments for your information. So that the total request for capital equipment purchases is $1,037,000.
Is this where the 5 ballistic vests would need to go as well?
Yes, ma'am. So we have some additions, and we asked last year that the sheriff let us know how many vests he needed to replace, or estimated he'd need to replace in 2021, and that is 5.
5, but I can't
And
have the
the
dollar.
number, I want to say that the vests are like $1,200 a piece.
Fifteen,
Uh,
12, 15?
There's two different.
$1,150 each.
Okay, so about 1,200.
Okay.
So 1,200 times 5 is 6,000 for ballistic vests. And then the warranty,
On the tasers.
or not warranty, but the annual payment, we agreed to 5 equal payments, as I recall, on a new set of tasers, and the company allowed the payments to be spread over 5 years with no increase in cost, and that's $37,000.
$38,160.
$38,160 for year 2 of the taser purchase, and that's a 5-year plan, as I recall. Okay, so that puts us at about 40, about $1,081,000. Okay.
President Foster, did you want to mention the discussion we had recently with emergency management, where we just kind of found out about the radios he was talking about?
I've already mentioned it.
I'm sorry?
I've already mentioned it. I just talked about the $515,000 for radios, and they need them no later than early 2022. All right, so questions, comments, thoughts? Obviously, the last few years, we've been using primarily the Cumcap Fund to make these capital investments. The Cumcap Fund is pretty significantly reduced. But there are alternatives. Any thoughts on capital purchases? And I'm gonna lump into this conversation because you all are aware of the DLZ report and the ongoing accrued maintenance of the buildings that the county owns and operates. And there are still millions of dollars in investment that need to be made in these buildings. So one that comes to mind, just because the price tag is so high, is the stonework on the courthouse, which is estimated at well over $1 million just for that piece. And of course, it's something that when it's done, nobody will ever notice that it has been done. But until it's done, there's always the possibility of water infiltration and the freezing and thawing cycles that can further damage the stonework. So there are those investments that will need to be made over time as well.
Will the commissioners prioritize a list of those projects and a cost estimation? Because we're going to be significantly down in those funds that we've been using to update these buildings, so.
Roger, I think you'll be the first to agree that over the last 2 or 3 years, I have continually asked for those prioritizations and anticipated construction for each year as it comes online. So we will continue to request that. Again, traditionally, those dollars have come from the Cumulative Capital Development Fund. And not too long ago, there was a healthy balance in that fund, but then we started making those improvements over the last 3 or 4 years, and that fund continues to dwindle. It brings in $350,000 to $375,000 a year. The Court Fund brings in less than that, about $260,000 or $270,000 each year. And again, a reminder that the Court Fund is within the levy. So any increase to the Court Fund would come out of the general fund. Any decrease in the Court Fund would go into the general fund, and that's why I've asked you to consider whether we might need to adjust that levy rate for Court up or down. I know there's sentiment that we don't want to eliminate that because we would no longer have that in a separate fund that's dedicated to building maintenance and repair. On the other hand, having it there limits what we can do with those funds. So it, to some extent, ties our hands and limits our flexibility. So, okay, you've got an idea that we're about 1.1 million. I will ask the commissioners to give us an update on the DLZ project list and if there are any projects that they want to prioritize and recommend for 2021. Further discussion on that?
I know that in the past, we've had some comment and some concern about redoing the chambers here. Is there any issues in evolving around that this year?
You know, I briefly mentioned it to Ken a while back, and I think he's still interested in doing some things in this room. It obviously is what now, a 45-year-old room, 50? Not, well, anyway, what, 78?
78?
So it's 42 years. I think that, for example, some changes to it could make it more usable for things other than council meetings. It could become a multi-purpose room. Having said that, not sure that this year is a good year to to look at that kind of investment.
I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that was on our list at the beginning of the year, and we did have several discussions with an architectural firm about different things that we could do. And we were moving forward because I did promise you that I would do that, and that was on the agenda for this year until COVID-19 showed up. Once that got in play, and then we began with that to look at other expenditures that we had to make, it was obvious that we probably would not have the dollars to be too much this year in that. But I think we'll have to wait and see until we get through this COVID-19, whether we can get back to that or not.
Yeah, I just recalled this in the past, discussing that issue quite a bit, and was just curious about it. I'm not advocating that we do that necessarily, as much as I just didn't know if there was any plans in
My
the...
goal was to have it done by the end of 2020. And as our former councilman, Peter Selesky, said, you know, your time frames never do work. And so that's what I was working on, Bob, was at the beginning of the year, but everything has changed now.
Yeah, well, and like I say, we're not sure when that'll change any other direction soon, so I just was curious if there had been any further discussion about it.
Not recently, but there was early in the year.
Yeah.
Okay, next on your agenda is preservation of the PUF fund. So, if you recall, Corey George was in here last week, and he asked us to increase the salary line items in the general fund for the probation officers by $5,000 per line, from $45,000 to $50,000, and he made a comment about doing that in order to preserve the PUF fund. So I just want to bring that up for your thought and discussion. And I know, Bob, you've had concerns over the years of how do you preserve the PUF fund, and I know that from periodically that department has made superhuman efforts to try to collect those dollars that are owed by the participants in the probation program.
And I do know that they've collected several $1 million over the years.
Sure.
To help offset these costs, but like I say, there again, we have to take a look at the whole picture.
So I just put that in there to remind you, and you saw the balance in the PUF fund is steadily declining, but there is still money there. There is still some collection, and at what point do we take an approach that it's more important to preserve the general fund than to preserve the PUF fund. There is no easy answer. I mean, you can spend it all tomorrow and then have to wait to use it again while it builds up. I think the revenue there is probably much more sporadic than the revenue in the general fund. So is there any benefit to taking that approach? We'd have to look at it. I just bring it up for a point to consider as we move forward.
Jeff,
Yes, sir.
just roughing it, I'm going to say that's a cost of about $100,000, isn't it?
Revenue of about $100,000?
No, that's the extra $5,000 per.
Oh, no, it's closer to 60,000. Remember, there's 15.
Yeah. Not everybody makes.
There's 15 slots, or is it 14?
There's 16.
16 probation officers.
Okay.
A couple of them are paid out of the grants.
Yeah, he's been shifting some of those officers over to the other side, to the when we made that transition to community correction becoming part of probation.
So I think there's about 13 or 14 that are actually in the probation general fund budget, and 2 or 3 of them are new, and so they're below the $45,000 threshold.
Gotcha.
So that increase from 45 to 50 wouldn't affect them. So I think it's either $55,000 or $60,000.
Okay, I just wanted a
that
rough
that
idea.
change would entail. Any other questions on that? If not, I added one. I'm not sure if it got to your agenda or not, but I asked Kim to put together an updated version. You know, we've talked in terms of how much does it cost to do a 1% raise for our staff in the general fund budgets. So that's what you will see here. So the first column is the department. The second column is what Kim has calculated as a 1% increase to that department's full-time staff. This does not include increases for the part-time employees. And again, remember that when we budget for the part-time employees, we budget for a particular number of hours, and we haven't at least guaranteed until we get into the budget process whether or not we will be able to increase the number of hours that are funded, or whether we'll have to decrease those. So part-time employees are paid on the same scale. They're classified now. We did that through the Irwin study. They're classified and they're paid at the same rate as the entry-level people, full-time people in that classification. So their salary levels, their hourly level is comparable to a full-time employee, but we don't necessarily keep the same number of hours. So if they were budgeted for 1,000 hours at $10 an hour, there's a budget line of $10,000. If their hourly rate goes up to $11 an hour, there may only be still $10,000 budgeted there, so their hours would have to be reduced unless we're able to fund those. So these are just full-time people. The total in the general fund is $230,920. Then when you add in the health department, the PUF payments, the plat book, a few others, that's $211,000. And then you add in the increases in FICA and PERF, $272,468.74. In round numbers is a 1%, the cost of a 1% increase in salaries. Question, Chris?
Yeah, on probation, you got $73,000 increase. Does that include the $5,000 that you're talking about adding?
Yes. Yes, it does.
But if you see below, there's Puff with a -37
Mm-hmm.
to offset it.
So those PUF dollars offset the total cost of the probation people. Okay?
What was the $12,000 figure on the general fund page you gave us in the beginning of increases in the general fund?
He also reduced one of his expenditures by 55,000. I think there might be another
He
one.
reduced the
This
the
is increase in
detention.
salaries.
Right.
Juvenile detention bed.
Okay.
That's the whole, that's for the
In
whole
total-
department.
In total, his
That's-
budget went up
that's the total.
12,000.
Even with all those $5,000 ones?
Yes,
Okay.
because he reduced the detention
ones,
by
okay.
55,000.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. I'm going to let that digest for a few minutes. And you know that, that you also have your budget book under all that other stack of papers. You also have the written explanations that the department heads turned in on their increases to the budget. So not sure that you've seen those yet. And then you've got your budget books. So let's take a few minutes and think about what we've talked about, what I've talked about for the last hour. So let me get a drink of water, and we'll regroup here in a minute. This probably makes riveting television, Eric. Maybe an Emmy in the works for you here. Tony, while they're taking a minute, do you want to talk about your need to hold a committee meeting for abatement?
Yes, we need to schedule a date for the tax abatement committee for Chris and Jeff for new abatement requests from Sugar Creek. If we're meeting next Wednesday, I suppose we could meet
Before the meeting?
that meeting, and then they will appear the following week on the 5th at the
So-
council meeting.
So your hope would be that the committee could meet next week, and then we can meet in council with Sugar Creek at the August,
Right.
regular August meeting,
Bring forth the
a recommendation, okay?
What, do you think you need about 15 minutes for that, or?
You should have received the request via email today, so, probably it would be best if we would schedule it at 4:30. next Wednesday.
Take about 30 minutes.
No.
You okay for next
Yeah.
Wednesday at 4:30, Chris? Okay. We'll need to get that advertised.
Okay. We also have, as far as real estate and personal property, abatements for this year, can you give me a list of who those are? I'm sure Sugar Creek and Taconic, but I don't know if
I'll
there's
have to
even
get it from the assessor's office.
So we need to review.
a brown book that has the real estate.
They keep it until they put all the information in, and I haven't gotten anything back yet.
Okay, okay. So actually,
You want to meet at 4?
we probably need to make it 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, Chris?
4 o'clock? Okay.
You looking at your driver to see if he could be here at 4?
We'll look at one rounded up someplace.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so then do we also need to advertise a public hearing for the August meeting?
I don't, we can check, but I don't believe so, because it's just a regular abatement. There's no after the fact
Okay, okay.
to it, so I think that's just normally a regular one.
Can you make a note on that, Kim, and we'll follow up tomorrow? You already did, didn't you? Good job. Thank you.
Are you going to advertise that or with that?
Beth will. I
Beth
have my
does
notes
that.
to get it to Beth.
Okay.
Okay. So you've had a few minutes to digest what we've talked about. Let's take a minute or two and discuss where you want to go from here. Please try to raise your hands so that we're not all talking over each other.
Yeah, it takes a minute to look up.
Do you want to go through the departments one by one? You've got the
one-
changes already highlighted in front of you.
Yeah.
We've been
the
over
ones
them
that we
twice
get the
now.
request for, at least.
I'm sorry?
At least the ones that we have the special request for.
The increases?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the first one is the clerk.
Did we get a revised?
We did
Budget.
not. We did not.
I don't see the need to
Yeah, I think
raise
we
the
need
money
to
of
let Tony make that change.
undetermined use when we don't have an election next year.
Do, is that in the voter registration office budget?
Is there an election?
Election board.
Is there an election office budget?
I'm having trouble finding.
Do you know where it is?
I do not.
Well,
Election.
auditor picked a bad time to step out.
It's under, right after council.
Election board.
Here it is right there.
So, she's asked for 50,000 instead of 40,000.
Jeff, I talked to Debbie about that the other day, and she said she grabbed, instead of grabbing last year's budget, she grabbed an older budget that had the 50,000 there, because we reduced that last year, so.
Do we normally leave that open on the off year?
You know, we've done it both ways. We've done it both ways, Chris, and it's almost 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. If we had a one-time purchase, for example, we want to buy a truck for the Plan Commission for $30,000, we could come up with $30,000 out of this budget.
But that's kind of the idea of what our council contingency fund is. isn't it?
Correct. Correct. But this is just, if we budget anything here, it's just going to sit there next year.
Well,
So, any thoughts?
I would leave it as status quo,
I agree.
40.
I take it out.
40.
We,
I don't think we-
you're saying leave it at $40,000?
Yes.
That's, yeah. I agree.
and then leave the entire budget with that one change?
Don't change.
I think there may be a twofold process here, as we consider all dollars, looking at some priorities here of these increases, and then also making some comparisons from the 1920 versus 21 request of their budgets, so that we can look at some possible areas that may give us some dollars.
Well, and again, making with the limitation that some of them could be permanent reductions and others could be temporary one-time reductions.
Right.
So you see the historical expenditures there, but there's no headers except on the front page.
Well, if you recall, she said she was gonna split that up in 2 or 3 other categories that she just threw it in contractual professional for the sake of throwing it in. Did you understand that last week?
I couldn't hear much of what she said.
Well, she
but-
said, well, really, I'm gonna use this much here and this much there, and
Well, then that was-
we didn't get that in writing.
No, we didn't. That was totally out of place there, because that, we
I said
obviously
let's-
want them to
Leave 10,000
tell
in
us
there and use
exactly.
the 30,000 to buy the truck this year. Since there's no election. We could go halves. I know we'll have to put it back next year.
Well, that's a normal thing, but that's basically, I thought that's what our contingency fund was for, the things. I don't know why we would want to use
Well, the
money that we-
contingency has from time to time been used for capital purchases, but it was never designed for capital purchases. It
But-
was designed to support increased costs in areas like the courts, where there's a lot of fluctuation in how much they have to spend based on how many trials they have and that kind of thing, so.
I still don't think leaving the money in the clerk's budget to buy a truck for the planning commission.
That's,
Yes.
I don't think anybody suggested that. She suggested we take it out to buy a truck.
I can say, I should take it out and put it someplace else, yes, but I'm not for leaving the money in there in an off-election year. But that's
So-
just- I'm just one.
The problem is, if we take it out, then next year we gotta put it back in.
That's right.
So we could only make a one-time expenditure with that money, so we'd have to be awful careful what we've done with that money.
Well,
Yeah.
Agreed. All right, so,
Well, we know where there's $40,000 if we get down to it, so.
well, there's actually more than that.
Well, I think if you look at the three, is it, well, the 30,000 accounts in the clerk, there are some dollars there that could be moved around to adjust. If you look at the history over the last couple of years and what's in there, I think there's some dollars that could maintain that even over the next year or more, staying the same.
Okay, is there a specific recommendation that we can gather around?
I think at this time, I would recommend that we remove the 50 and replace it with 40 at this time. Pretty much maintains our budget as is for this
Okay.
go-around.
So there's 3 different recommendations at the moment. One, to disregard her request for an increase. One, to disregard it and take $30,000 out to buy a truck. and one to disregard it and reduce everything to zero? Is that your
On that line
suggestion,
item,
Chris?
yes, on that line item, 0.
Okay, and leave everything else where it is?
Well, yeah,
Because
I
really,
don't,
probably the only thing that they're gonna have any expenses on is the election board itself, which is $3,000.
I wish
Might be
here,
some-
I guess
some
we had a little
contractual.
history on this. Go back
It's right here in front of you.
Yeah, you have it.
to the,
You just don't, the only thing you don't have is the headers for those columns. So the last
Oh.
column is 2017 expenditures. Next to last column is 2017 budget, then 2018 expenditures, 2018 budget, 2019 expenditures, 2019 budget, and then 2020 expenditures through the end of June. And so you can see that in 2020, there have been expenditures in the first 6 months.
well, 2020, yeah, because we have an election.
Right.
But
So for half of an election. Let's see, what was the last year then that there was no election? Is it 2017?
Yes, look at the far right.
So if you look at the far right-
$20,000.
That's what was spent the last time there was no election.
I think there's 152,000 total in it, so I think it's really there's about 132,000 that we could look at as for
One-time expenditures.
expenditures only.
I think the only election could possibly be Cambridge City this year. Talking to Tara, she thought possibly Cambridge would be the only one that would hold an election this year if they did.
In 2021,
So
Yes.
an election for one or two of the town council members.
Clerk or something.
I don't think it's the year for clerk, but I'm not sure. So, which is probably.
Several of the smaller communities are going, trying to get it in the cycle with general elections,
And they should, yeah.
and should that way save them a lot of money too, so.
Because they end up paying us back for
Yeah.
the cost of holding the election for them,
Right.
right?
right.
All right, so with that additional information, what's your pleasure?
I'd like to see us take 120,000 out of the total budget, and those dollars could only be spent for one-time expenditures.
And where do you propose to budget those dollars?
Well, we can look at where they were spent in 2017 and do something.
No, I mean, you're going to take $120,000 out. Where do you want to put it? You want to put it in the council contingency? You want to put it somewhere else? You want to?
It could be in council contingency for the time being, but it could be used for equipment purchases. Ultimately.
Right. From it, but it needs to come from some line item.
It has to come from where?
A line item. I mean, if we're going to appropriate it without doing a special appropriation, we'll have to, or an additional appropriation, we'll have to put it somewhere in the budget.
I guess I would have to go back and look at all the increases for us to decide which of these items are going to be approved, or we would like to see approved. Also, we have the 4,000 accounts, one-time dollars, and how much are we going to allot in each of those areas. So as these dollars do come to us, or we look for them to help offset those one-time and/or increases in the general fund. So I don't know, do we need to appropriate it right now? I think there's a little more conversation needs to be had
Yeah.
as far as prioritizing some of those.
Makes a big dent in a couple of our 4,000 items.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
Council contingency is the easiest way.
well, and again, you're right, Tony, we don't have to put it anywhere now, but we need to take it out of here if we're going to take it out. So are you suggesting then that we leave what was spent in 2017 and take out everything else?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a proposal. Is that a motion?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Chris? Kim, did you get that?
No.
Okay, so we want to reduce every line item to what it was, or what was actually expended in 2017.
Thank you.
Further discussion? You don't want to leave any wiggle room there? Couple,
I'm not sure why they had the expenditures that they had in 17.
I'm not either. Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Any further conversation?
The only thing is, if they get into travel for any reason there, we might need a little extra money there.
But this would only be travel for the election workers.
Right, election board, they may have to travel. I'm not sure where they do much traveling, as far as,
Everything's virtual right now.
but
anyway.
you got $1,239 in 17.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, so Kim, you got that motion?
I do, sir.
You're good with that? Okay. Next department is too many pieces of paper here now. What's the next proposed increase?
Changes.
Plan commission.
Okay, so Plan Commission,
They're after, keep going, they're number, Department 79. They're after the commissioners.
Okay, I'm trying to find it.
so Plan Commission is asking for money for contractual, $8,640, which I believe they need.
Yeah, but is that an IT purchase?
The
Yeah.
question becomes whether it should be in the Plan Commission or IT. I kind of favor IT.
I do too.
And I actually would propose to pay for that just out of their
Tech budget.
their technology 4,000 account budget. Whatever we end up budgeting for that. So I would, where did you say the Plan Commission is?
It's
I
after
got
the
it.
commissioners.
I got it.
Commissioners was next, and then it's Plan Commission
I
and
got
then
it.
IT.
Commissioner General?
I got it.
Back up to the front here.
Okay, so is there a proposal to move that to IT?
So
I'll make a
moved.
motion. Well, I'll second Chris's motion then.
Okay, Chris makes the motion and Gary seconds to take it out of Plan Commission.
Can I modify it?
Speak.
Instead of just taking it out of the 4,000 line item,
We could have a separate contract, or add it to
if we could
contractual.
add it to contractual and reduce the 4,000 account.
Okay, I'll modify the motion to
Okay,
meet that.
Gary, will you
Second.
modify the
Yeah.
second? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll take the 8640 out of Plan Commission. We will move it to the contractual line item in IT. And to pay for it, we will reduce the computer equipment line item by that same $8,640. That's the motion. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Make it so, Madam Auditor. All right. Next is court services. Now, make sure that you make that change, guys, in your budget sheets for IT.
If you turn your page, court services begins at the bottom of the next page.
Okay, I'm still looking at IT to get that.
IT was next page here.
Yeah, it's right below. So the contractual goes up by $8,640, and the computer equipment goes down by $8,640. Okay. Court services wants to increase pauper attorney by $70,000, medical testing by $20,000, and criminal appeals by $20,000. And so part of my conversation was with Corey was if we left it the same with our ongoing commitment to fund whatever they have to spend, because those are things that are out of their control. They're dictated by the number of trials and cases that they have, the number of appeals of their decisions that are filed. And he said, I can just tell you that they requested to have the line items increased. So you have the same information I have. What's your pleasure?
I think for the last several years, we've been picking those tabs up, and I don't know that there's been any problems or any complications with that.
Not that I'm aware of.
So I would support just doing it as we've always done.
Okay. And not granting these increases, but paying them out of council contingency.
And to make sure that they understand that we will provide that funding for them should they need it.
Let's take a look at where they're at. Through the end of June, they're at $98,765 in pauper attorney, and that is with the reduced activity due to COVID-19. So they're halfway through, they're more than halfway through their money after 6 months.
Yeah.
With the reduced workload of COVID-19.
Go up just a little more. Not all the way to 250, but maybe
And
200 or something like that.
Look at the next two line items there. They've spent $19,000 out of $20,000 that's budgeted for the medical testing, and $28,000 out of $40,000 for criminal appeals.
And the history on that one. Really.
Yeah, it bounces around.
Yeah.
So Bob has made a recommendation that we leave it as is with the agreement that we pay for it out of council contingency as necessary. What do the rest of you think?
I think if we do that, we need to note it in our contingency fund.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
the potential of, so that at least we have that in front of us as we move through the year.
I'm with Chris. I think we probably ought to bump them each up a little
I
bit.
think if we know that this is too low, why are we sit here and purposely budget below what we know the need's gonna be? I think the idea is try to hit the budget as close as we can.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm just gonna throw a suggestion out.
Throw
that
some
we-
numbers out.
Okay, for the pauper attorney to go to 200. For the medical testing, I think the 40,000 is in reason. And I think at this point, the criminal appeals maybe stay at the 60.
Okay? And I'd probably see your 200 and raise you 20 on the
Okay.
pauper attorney.
Yeah.
But
Comments?
So we are at what now?
I guess I'm suggesting 220 for pauper attorney, and then Chris's 40 and 60 for medical.
You said leave criminal appeals the same, right?
criminal appeals.
Oh, did you? Okay,
Oh,
at
excuse
40.
me,
Okay.
Yes, 40,
You
I'm
did say
sorry.
that.
So a total of 300,000 then, 220, 40, and 40
Okay, I'm by that.
instead, so that's 50,000 less than their request.
I think we still need to make a notation that we will
Absolutely.
guarantee the,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, which means
Oh, yeah.
that we can't spend the entire line item on other things. So, anybody want to put that in the form of a motion?
I
Or we?
will.
Okay, thank you, Beth.
That we make the pauper attorney 220,000, medical testing 40,000, and leave criminal appeals at 40.
I'll second that.
There's a second, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
So that's a 60,000 increase?
Correct.
Instead of 110.
I'm sorry, it's,
40, 50,
yeah,
60.
40, 60,000 increase, and 50,000 reduction from where they wanted to be. So we, about halfway to
Yep.
their request. Okay. You got all that, Kimberly?
Yes, sir.
Good job. All right. That leaves the probation department. Robert, as the probation department director emeritus, do you want to weigh in on this one first?
well, it's just that, you know, it's inevitable as time goes on, the probation office will increase in size and the collections of funds will decrease through PUF. So I think we have to look at that realistically. And in many counties, what they use their PUF funds are for extra type of activities, not for direct salary structures. And so I would support this.
You would support the recommendation from the probation department?
Yes, I would.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? I think obviously they've tried to be able to live within their current budget as much as they can. A reduction in the youth detention beds is
That
a
program has come along
demonstration of
great
that.
since they initiated that. It really has. It's saved the county several hundred thousands of dollars since they've initiated it. So I think their efforts are sincere. I don't know that they can always control the PUF funds coming in from probably the people who are least likely to find employment, you know.
Right.
So the total impact there,
Is $12,756.
Yeah, I mean, it's
To the general-
minuscule in
general
comparison to what
fund.
they're doing. And like I say, on many of those probation officers, they won't even attain that $50,000 level, so there'll be drawback money coming back from those accounts.
So,
There's 3 right now.
There's
There's
three
three
there.
There's 3 right now that are
four
under that.
that are
Yeah.
below, right.
Yeah, 3, personal count.
So, what are your, the rest of you think? And again, to some extent, this is a separate issue from the issue of, and it's premature to cross this bridge because we don't know yet what we're going to do with salaries for everyone else. But we will need to consider salaries here and what kind of increase if we're not able to give increases across the board to
Yeah, I think
all other employees.
it's just make a note that we gotta, if we can't give salary increase, we have to go back to this budget.
And remember that those increases that are required by the salary matrix mandated by the state, there
It's
may
the
still be
Judicial conference is the one that makes.
whatever, whoever mandates it, there may be some people that have to get an increase
Right.
because it's their year to get an increase.
And the other thing is, can we cut them out of this, our general fund 1% sheet you gave us? Can we cut probation out of there?
Well, that
The
is.
1%?
That does not include the 1% for the probation officers. All that is their raise that they proposed.
Oh, is
And
it?
then the one employee that is not a probation officer,
Clerical.
for her to have the 1%.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
and that number really is just a guide.
Yeah.
An estimate of what it would cost. So, there'll be changes in staffing between now and the end of the year, and so those numbers will fluctuate anyway. But in general, 270 for a 1% increase. So, Bob, I haven't heard any real opposition. Do you want to put your motion in
Motion
place?
that we leave his request as he presented it to us, and that we look at that as we come to a conclusion on salaries across the board.
And that's a
Second.
total cost of $12,756 in increases to
That's
the
correct.
general fund. There's a second by Mr. Saunders. Was that your question, Kim? Okay, who seconded? Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. Let's go to the bridge fund.
Fund 1135. You just keep going backwards. Or forwards, I guess.
11 what?
1135.
1135.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
And the funds, or the account items that they changed are all at the very top of the page.
so these dollars being requested are all for major projects.
Yes.
So why would we not take that, or can it be taken out of the dollars that will be going to the highway department from
It could be,
the-
but it also can be taken out of the bridge fund, which is what we're talking about. This is the bridge fund budget. They've got a $5 million balance. They
Yeah.
project that that's about where they'll be at the end of the year. For next year, they want to propose spending an additional $700,000, or at least budgeting it in projects. Keep in mind that in the bridge fund, a lot of their expenditures are driven by the timing of federal grants, and, you know, some of these dollars are the match for those grants, and sometimes those change from year to year. It's also driven by what the new program at the state of community crossings, and so they budget sometimes, and then they end up not spending it because some
They
other
get the
funding
matching
stream
money.
didn't come through that they were anticipating. Or, you know, some other bridge has a greater demand, and so they come to us and ask us to transfer money from Bridge 215 to Bridge 97, because that one has to be fixed all of a sudden.
Which you will have on August 5th. You'll have that request on August 5th.
Oh, okay. Not for those particular numbers, because I
no.
just made those up.
No.
But,
There is a request, but no, not for those numbers.
okay. So, is your pleasure to go ahead and approve that increase in the bridge fund?
Yes, so moved.
Second?
There's a motion and a second to approve the $725,000 in increases, or to approve the bridge fund requests as submitted. Seconded by Mr. Smith. Further discussion? If there's no further discussion, then all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay. And then local road and street.
Fund 1169.
1169.
1169. Oh,
It's kind of throwing me because these changes are not highlighted in color.
There's only 3 lines.
Mine are. Yours are? Oh,
Summer special.
my bridge fund wasn't.
The bridge fund wasn't, but
I didn't highlight bridge.
Okay. That's why mine wasn't highlighted.
Nobody's was, don't feel bad.
Okay.
the bridge was, yeah.
Kept looking for
Sorry.
the Crayola marks. Couldn't find them. Okay, so highway,
The top 3 lines are the ones that they increased.
I'm unclear on Mike's recommendations there. Apparently, there's been some considerable give and take between Mike and DLGF and about the expected revenue from these funds. If you recall, last year we had to cut his budgets when the DLGF approved the final budgets. And so this year, apparently there's significant money available that was not available last year. So do you have an explanation or a question or a comment
I was
or
just
what?
wondering if he was taking into consideration the money from the jail bond.
Well, no, because that's not going to go in this fund.
Not into this particular one, but the one for highway.
They could be
It'll be its own fund, I believe.
What?
I believe it will be, because it all has to be spent on maintenance and construction for either bridge or highway.
Okay.
So
Well,
we'll have
two
to
of these-
clarify that, but I did talk to him about that, and
Okay.
he indicated that, no, he recognized that that would be a separate fund.
But if it could be used for roads, your stone and gravel is maintenance for the roads, as well as bituminous. So if we were to reduce here, and that expenditure then could be out of the jail bond dollars.
I believe it can be. It's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And
So-
remember that with a change by the state in how it needs to be accounted for in these funds, they have to spend no more than 50% on administration and at least
Right.
50% on construction and maintenance. So they're even at the point where they're taking an employee's time and tracking in an 8-hour day, how many hours did they spend on maintenance and repair and construction, and how many hours did they spend on something that doesn't qualify. So it's going to be a challenge. So again, I believe you're correct that these line items could be interchangeable between those different funds. Whether it makes more sense to preserve the balance in these ongoing funds versus that one-time fund, it might. But there still would need to be some expenditure, as I understand it, in those line items that can be categorized as maintenance and construction, or preservation, I think is the word they use, preservation and construction, so that they can balance the 50-50 mix of spending these dollars. So I think Mike is probably best able to define how that needs to be spent. I know he knows that there's going to be money, but none of us knows yet how much money is going to go, be transferred over to his department from the jail bond fund. So I guess I'm inclined to leave it the way he's presented it at this point, with the certain knowledge that the DLGF will come in and cut his budget anyway if he's over budgeted, and then possibly, depending on timing, allow him to make some changes as we identify more closely how much money will be available from the jail bond fund, and let him play with those numbers. And that could be for 2021 or even 2022, because that fund will exist until he spends all that money. There's only going to be a one-time infusion of funds. So when it's gone, then he'll have to go back to these funds entirely. Tony, you look like you want to say something.
No, I was just gonna say, let's leave it and move on.
Okay. Everybody okay with that for now? Okay. The 911 fund has an increase of $10,000 for
What number is
contractual.
it?
1222.
Thank you.
Okay. Equipment maintenance service contract. So do we have the balance in that, in the 911 fund in our sheet here?
It is $1,095,784.
And his budget request is for a total of $875,704. So there is some wiggle room for increase. There's probably not enough money available to purchase that full $515,000 of radios out of that.
Can part of that balance be utilized for the radio?
I think it can be.
So,
We'll need to look at it a little more closely.
Yeah.
Because, we need to know what the annual revenue is there to be able to calculate. And do we have that? We've got that in this financial report, don't we? In the fund balance report?
Yeah, up through June, or up through July 20th.
Okay. What's the number?
Hold on.
911.
They've taken in 386,000 so far.
it's a yearly, how much on an
Okay,
annual
so-
basis?
So roughly, it's $600,000 or $650,000 a year. So that,
I could double check and email that to you tomorrow.
okay, let's take a look at that. I don't see any problem with a $10,000 increase. And do we have the written information on that? That increase?
We do, I saw.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so take a look at that, and we'll get some additional information on the revenue from that fund, and we'll take a look at that next week.
Based off of when would be an opportune time for them to implement that new software, the timing of that, could it be such that we could look at 2 budget cycles to pay for it?
Would you like
What-
me to have Matthew at next Wednesday's meeting?
What new software are you talking about?
For the radio system?
Is that new software? I thought it was radios.
Well, it's all of the
Well,
above,
it has to have it.
hardware and software.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, depending on what their opportune time of making that transition,
I think their request is for the sooner the better,
why?
but no later than
Right.
early 2022. So,
Well, this could be at the, I think we've done that on a couple other, just like the 5-year, with the,
Body scanner.
no,
Yes.
for the sheriff's department,
Right.
that's the tasers.
tasers, but I have worked other contracts based off the timing of it to be able to utilize a 2 budget cycle in order to pay for that implementation and still get within a timeline. I'm just saying it's an option.
And that's an option if it's something that we're going to pay out of reserves. I don't think that timing is as critical, but it's certainly something we can look at.
Would you like Matthew to be here next Wednesday?
What's your pleasure?
I just think, the question being asked of him is, when's the most opportune time for him to make that transition happen?
Well,
And
because, again, we could pull the trigger tomorrow and do it next month if that's the most advantageous time, or do
He
part of it.
tells in his letter that the hardware and the software will no longer be supported on December 31st of 2021. So
Right.
and he's saying they need to be here in 2021 or early 2022, but that's pushing it if we wait till.
well, what I'm
Right,
saying
but-
is they
but
could
it could
have
be
it
earlier
in.
than
Yeah, it could be earlier. It'd be nice to have it way
and-
before this
and
December 31st.
work with them to say,
deadline.
okay, we're going to pay a part of it in December and the rest of it in January. So
Yeah.
that gets you over your 2 cycles.
Yeah, but again, if we're paying it out of reserves, which we have cash in hand,
Well,
not sure
true.
that's
It just depends on where we take it
necessary.
out of, and I
Yeah.
don't think we've determined all that yet.
Not yet, not yet. All right. So do you want to go to the 4,000 accounts? Equipment requests?
That was one of the sheets I handed out today.
I know, I
Yeah,
just got to
sure.
find which one it
Up there
is.
someplace.
It's not those. Not that.
This one.
That.
Yeah.
That.
Starts off at $6,000 for batteries.
There it is. All right. So, I think I'm hearing you say that the radio system is something we want to do. It's just a matter of timing, whether we're going to do it this year, next year, spread over 2 years. And that, to some extent, is determined by what fund the dollars are going to come from.
Now, was there a consideration of using part of that budget, the 600,000, to offset that one-time cost?
Part of which budget?
Uh,
911 fund?
Yes.
He said he is open to discussion on any,
Amount of dollars that could come out of that.
So, anybody have any thoughts that they would not support purchase of a new radio system? Okay. And the batteries, I've slept since I read that. Do the batteries support that radio system, or is it for something else?
That was a separate item.
Okay.
it's for the UPS systems for both EMA and the 911 center.
Okay.
They were originally purchased with grant money in 15, and all of the units have expired and need to be replaced.
Is that the UPS?
Yes.
Okay. I'd recommend both of those.
Any dissent there? So yes to both of those, and we'll determine when and from what fund. Building commission, $30,000 for a truck. Chris, just for your edification, I followed up with the sheriff on a vehicle for soil and water. And he said it should be available in the next couple of weeks. But there needed to be some provision for taking the decals and equipment off of it. And we currently do not have a mechanic who would typically do that. So, so that's the next piece that needs to be figured out.
We could work on maybe.
Yeah, in fact, I was thinking of just assigning you to sort that out. Can you do that?
Got a pair of side cutters, you can use one hand, Chris.
Maybe take it up to Gary's shop and.
Meeting's been too long, Kenny.
Okay.
Okay.
So, a truck for the building commission, $150,000 for trucks for highway, $136,000 for body cameras, $100,000 for the cameras, and 30-some thousand for the warranty. $200,000 for cars that are replaced after 100,000 miles. Ballistic vests at approximately $6,000, and $38,160 for the 2021 payment on the tasers, which would be the second payment on a 5-year replacement cycle. So, what are your current thoughts on those? And remember that, whatever we spend on these items is not available for any building maintenance construction projects that might be necessary, so there'll need to be some accommodation built in there. But this is not all available between the Cumcap and Court funds. And of course, these are not able to be purchased. These capital equipment items cannot be purchased out of the Court funds. Those would be limited to the construction projects.
The $200,000 on cars, is that what our part's to be, or are you gonna pay for one of them out of commissary?
That's what our part. In fact, he asked me if it would be possible to increase that number from 200,000, and I believe what he told me was currently the cars they're buying are about $28,000 a piece. That would primarily be for the Dodge cars, Dodge Chargers in an all-wheel drive configuration. And he needs to replace 8, is what he told me, and he would be replacing one other out of Commissary Fund. So that would be in addition to the 8 he feels like he needs to replace. At $28,000, I don't think. Yeah, you can't replace 8 cars at $28,000 a piece for $200,000. So he was asking for the additional $24,000, but that was not in his initial request, as you see. He did ask for $200,000.
I would ask for him to consider working with the insurance to increase the mileage. I think it's changing. We can get more life out of these cars and maintain a safe car. 125,000 miles, they're running about 25,000 a year. And readjust his plan may affect the number of cars that we have to purchase, or should be purchasing based off that replacement plan. So I still think there's opportunity for him to check into that and move that to 125,000.
Mr. Paust?
Sure.
So the cars belong to the commissioners. I believe you've had this conversation with the sheriff in the past about number of miles they run those
Correct.
cars. And any thoughts from
Well,
you?
the discussion that we've had is that we have felt that with the new technology and everything that's been coming in place, that we could take that 100,000 miles and possibly move it up to 125,000. We always get the pushback that, well, we can only about 100,000 miles is the best that we can do on those cars. So We have talked about that. We've also talked about the possibility if we had budget restraints, there may come a year when we'd have to say no new cars this year. So then we tried to look at that and say, okay, how would that relate then to repairs on the vehicle? And would we have more repairs of the vehicles than what it would cost us if we bought the new car? So that's the discussion that we have had on that. And we have not come to any final decision at all on that. I would like to check that part out on the insurance, that they're saying if they go to 125, that cost, I'd like to see what that additional cost would be.
Well, I think with all the,
Repairs, you'd have to look at the approximate cost of repairs of all the vehicles, and maybe buy half as many vehicles, but you're not gonna spend $28,000 a vehicle on repairs. Then another 25,000 miles 1 year. I mean, that's not quite jiving in my head anyway.
Have we compared that 100,000 or 120,000 with other departments? Like I'm going to say, you can't compare to the city maybe or the state police, but other
Counties,
Counties.
sheriff departments, not that I'm aware of, Chris. Are you volunteering to do that?
Give me a little, get a list of people I would to
Make some calls.
contact. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Chris, I'll be happy to work with you on that.
Okay.
And we will, we have not done that. That's a good suggestion to see what other. I will tell you, many of our vehicles that, as we give them to other departments, and other departments are thrilled to death to have them. These
Yeah.
are very, very small departments. You know, Greens Fork, Milton, different places where they don't put a lot of mileage, and they're not on a, well, they're gonna be on the interstate where they're chasing somebody at high speeds, but I'll be happy to look at this, see if I can come up with something for you.
good deal. Okay, you guys can work together on that. Thoughts on the body cameras while we're talking about the sheriff?
I just think that's something that is necessary. In today's society, we need to provide that equipment for not just our officers' safety, but for the public's trust.
I think so too, and this includes some money for storage for the video of, what's happened, because if you don't keep it, it doesn't do you any good to film it in the first place. So are you inclined, you've got, I think, did you give them all copies of the information about the body cameras?
Yes.
So you've got information there, why don't you take that, review that and digest it, and we can have the sheriff in to have a little more discussion. Do you want to invite him in for the regular council meeting on the 5th of August?
Yeah, I think that's good. Now, I assume that the $6,000 for vest was designed for what? Was that for jail officers? Or was that for road officers?
That's for road officers, I believe. That's the
vacancies he has to custom fit.
Do the jail officer vests have to be custom fit as well?
They do.
Any,
Okay.
yes.
And which one's more expensive?
Well, I'm not sure what he's getting here. That's why I was curious about the $6,000 and how many.
That was 5 at
It was
1,200
5 vests,
apiece.
and so we just estimated the 6,000.
Right.
Based on the prior
That
cost.
sounds pretty close to what I recall. But back in my day, they used to cost $1.50, though,
Well, they were just cotton, weren't
Well,
they?
now that I read this, the 1,200 each would be for the on-the-road deputies, and it's only $725 for jail deputies. But in the minutes, it does not specify who needed the 5 vests for 2021.
And I think it's just a guesstimate number
Okay.
anyway. One of the things that it would be nice, in my opinion, to be able to put some money in their equipment budget, their ongoing general fund equipment budget, but that requires knowing, to some extent, how much it's going to cost on an annual basis. And the wild card is every time somebody leaves the department, they have to replace the personal protective gear for the new people, and particularly for the vests, because they are fit to an individual's body.
He's done that with the closing allowance. So if they look at this as a equipment to outfit the officers, the tasers, we know for the next plus years, that could go back into his budget as well.
It could, just, assuming that we're able to come up with that much money out of recurring funds. I mean, it could be a one-time source of funds that you put into the general fund just for the next 4 years, I suppose. But if it's that way, is it really worth putting it into his budget as opposed to budgeting it specifically out of one-time dollars each year? So the vests are things that we have to provide. We have from time to time asked him to pay for part of that out of his own internal sources, whether that's the misdemeanor fund or sometimes it's been a grant, sometimes it's been commissary. So there's been a number of different ways that he's funded parts of that. Why don't we ask him to come to the August council meeting, and we can go through the cars, the body cameras, the vests, the tasers all at once, and it'd be good to get some additional information. Excuse me, I got the hiccups here all of a sudden.
I mean, I think we would all agree the last thing we want to do is to send those officers out into harm's way and not protected properly, but by the same token, there's options I think that we have to explore to see if we can minimize the cost if we can.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Did we ever come to a conclusion one way or the other on the truck for the building commission?
No.
Excuse
No.
me. And that is replacing an older truck. It's 20 years or so old, with a number of miles. You know that Mr. Higginbotham wouldn't request a replacement unless what it's replacing needs to be replaced. This one goes out on the road, excuse me, hiccups. And my recollection is that the one that it is replacing would go to building and grounds, because it won't have to travel as far. Can be
Is there
used
any
for
chance that a used
hauling
vehicle
trash
might work
around
here? Or is this, or does he need a new vehicle?
Does anybody need a new vehicle?
Well, yes, my wife tells me when she needs a new vehicle.
So, that's always an alternative. Again, it just means it'll need to be replaced earlier, so.
You didn't buy her a new vehicle for her birthday?
I did,
Oh, okay.
as a baby Buick.
Okay. Any further discussion on the 4,000s? All right, so give me some guidance in what additional information you need to be able to make some final decisions on some of these. Excuse me.
Jeff, I think you've assembled a lot of very collective information here for us. And, yeah, we need to go home and do a little digesting, but I can say I do appreciate the effort and bringing it to our attention to different things and so forth. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're quite welcome, Chris. A pleasure. So I think, we have the one-time dollars to be able to make some of these investments. And let's also think outside the box a little bit. We have the Cumcap Fund, which is dwindling. It essentially will be at zero at the end of this year, give or take. It generates about 300 and a little less than that, I think, $360,000 to $380,000 a year. That's in the face of requests for about $1.1 million in capital outlays. So obviously it's not enough to keep up with this area. We've got some one-time dollars depending on where we end up in terms of wanting to keep the reserve funding in the general fund. We've got somewhere between around $1 million, let's say, at the 8.5 million mark that we could spend out of the general fund, but that also has to look at, and this is we almost got away from here without reviewing our sheet on the health insurance.
We don't have that.
So we have somewhere, Kenny, you took those back from me, I'm sorry.
I got them here.
You're sitting behind Beth and Tony there, and I lose sight of you from time to time. But
Would you take these?
Mr. Paust has information on the health insurance, the renewal, the premiums, what it'll cost to fund that program going forward, and how much additional investment might be required in the health insurance line item, which, as you will recall, is currently in the council budget, and it's budgeted at about $4.2 million currently.
Okay, if you look at the sheet that you have there, let's talk about how we got to where we currently are at this time. Each year, we go out to look at our reinsurance costs that we had. This year, if you look in column 1, you will see the different areas that make up our fixed costs that we have. In column 2, at the top of that, you'll see on the third line down, $110,000. That's what we did this year for our reinsurance. So what...
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Okay, so in column 2,
you go down the
line,
third line there, it'll show you $110,000.
Uh-huh.
All right, that's what we had for reinsurance this year.
So, again, let's explain that in a little more detail. So, any individual whose medical costs exceed $110,000 are then paid by the reinsurance. Is that
That is correct.
Okay.
So what we did this year to try and hold our costs down, in working with Dunn, we decided to go up to $150,000. that we would absorb the cost up to 150, and as Jess said, any cost that went over that, then they would pay us back on reinsurance. So the reinsurance people, they went out to 5 different companies this year, asking them to quote. We only had one company that responded to us. This was the same company that insured us this year, and we were very fortunate, we felt, to get one company to come in and actually quote us. And the reason for that is when they look at the reinsurance, we have to give them all the information for our past 3 years of usage. In 2017, our usage was 87.9. In 2018, we were at 98.5. And in 2019, we were at 86.3 for an average of those 3 years of 90.9%. So when the other 4 companies looked at us, they were not interested in quoting us because of the high usage factor that we have. The one that really hit us was that one in 2018 at 98.5% on there. Currently this year, we're running about 84.2% currently at this time. However, they do not factor in what your current year is that you're working on. So in going out and working with the company we had, if you move over to column 4, you can go through the individual costs. I won't go through all of them, but I'll drop down. If you go down to where it says total fixed cost, you'll see a number of $808,733. If you go directly over to back to column 2, at the same area, you'll see this year we're paying $797,007. So there's a small increase in our fixed costs. However, then, when you get down into the aggregate factor and you look at the numbers on there in column 4, you will see what they have factored in for the cost for each of the areas that we insure our members, from employees on down to the family plan. If you look at that, and if you look at the total on that, it comes out about $5,684,412 compared to this year in column 2. If you go back over to column 2, $4,771,953. So you can see the big difference that we have in there. So in working with Dunn and looking at, well, what should we present to you budget-wise? So if you look in column 7, down at the bottom, you'll see a number there of $5,636,894. That would be if we factored in 100% and of our fixed cost and 85% of our aggregate costs that we have. So looking back and talking to Jeff, you put about $4.2 million in there last year for health insurance. So if we took the 85% of the aggregate figure that we have, it'd be about $4,831,750 that's in column 6 on there. So we really think that we could budget this year for that amount. We're having a good year now. We're hoping we'll continue. We're due to have some good years, so we're hoping this year that we would be okay there, that you could look at that 4.8. But that's still well over $600,000 more that you would have to put into the health system. The employees are putting in $885,000 a year is what the employees are putting into the program currently at this time. President Plaster asked me what I thought the commissioners were going to do about the employees' share this year, if we were going to increase that or what we were going to do. We've only looked at the numbers that I've given you here this evening. We've not had a discussion as to what that increase might be. I ran a couple of quick numbers that if we went up 10% for the employees, that would bring us up to $970. If we went up about 12%, about $991, or close to $1 million that would put in. So I don't know where we will end up at this time with the program as to what the commissioners come up with as to how much we need to have the employees. It could be we may have to have even higher numbers yet than that. I just picked those two to see about what it would do, what the increase would be on there. So that's what we're looking at. The other thing we had to take into consideration is we were looking at the numbers this year as to why our costs are there. We have 2 lasers that we're looking at going into this year. One of those is in the $200,000 bracket. The other one is anticipated in $325,000. So you don't know. Those numbers could be close. They could be even higher than those 2 numbers. So that reinsurance person is looking at those as to the cost as we go down the road. So I'd give you a brief idea of what we're looking at and what we're running into. Health insurance costs are only going to go up. Each year they're going up. They're not leveling off. It's 5, 6, 10%, depending, are increasing. Our goal this year was to develop only 2 plans and then offer a savings plan. But based on everything that happened, the fact we could only get 1 person to reinsurance at this time, and then with COVID-19, with everything that was happening, we felt this was not a year to reduce the number of plans that we were offering, that all of our employees were experiencing enough stress in all of our lives that this year we would continue to offer the 3 plans that we have. And as you know, we have the current plan that we have, then we have one that's a little bit higher, and then a high deductible plan. And so we have had several people that participated in this year. We had a little over 17 people that participated in the high deductible plan.
How can you have a little over 17 people?
Well, we had 17 people. Well, I couldn't remember whether it was 17 or 18, Jeff. But so that has worked pretty well. To give you an idea on breakdown, as you look on your sheet there, you can see in column 3 down at the bottom, under the aggregate factor, you can see that we have 147 employees in the single plan, employee and children 55, employee and spouse 61, in the family 42, for 305 people on the plan. Also, I ought to mention this to you too, because you might think of this later, with the health department no longer being in our plan. We had 17 folks over there. Let me check my notes a second so I can get that a little accurate to you, what we had. Yeah, we had 33, we had 17 employees, 16 dependents, and 33 belly buttons out of the health department is what we had. Their experience that we had was below, their claim cost was below any of the others that we had, so they didn't think we would have any monumental difference in that area with them coming off at this time. So I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
So you said that the employees pay in $880,000.
$885,000.
And are we certain that that is just the health insurance number, doesn't include what's deducted for dental insurance and other?
Yes, that comes out of a different fund.
Okay. So between what the county pays, what currently, and what the employees pay, we're essentially at $5 million. There is currently a balance of about 1.2 million
Yeah.
in, that is maintained by the Kathy Dunn and her people. So that's 6.2 million total. And I would suggest that looking at funding it at the 85% aggregate is pretty, it's not a good prospect given our last 3 or 4 years of experience, if we want to maintain a reserve in the 1 million plus range. And remember that reserve in the last 5 years has been as high as 3.5 million. It's been as low as zero.
Zero,
I think,
yeah,
at
zero.
times.
Well, we were very fortunate that we had that reserve for the last 2 or 3 years. You guys
Absolutely.
would have had to put a tremendous amount more funding into the health insurance.
So I would personally be more comfortable if we're looking at the 90% or even 95% aggregate. And, you know, we have to balance that with how much money do we have to be able to put into the program. And probably should be thinking in terms of recurring dollars as much as possible, although it wouldn't have to be. So this gives you more food for thought. I did, and we didn't review the council budget. We probably should go back and do that before we leave tonight. But I included more money in what's put into health insurance, as well as increasing the council contingency to have some flexibility when we advertise the budget. So what other questions do you all have on the health insurance for Commissioner Paust?
We will be looking also this year, as we'll be looking at 2022 and whether or not we want to make any changes to the plans that we do offer. And so we're always looking at that each year. I will say, in working with Dunn, they're extremely good at bringing suggestions to us as to how we might be able to hold our costs down. We do have good plans that we offer, and I'm sure we're going to have to take a look at each and every one of those plans, and we may have to change what we offer in those plans to our folks as the costs continue to increase. So we will continue to look at that as we continue talking especially with Kathy Dunn, as we look at these numbers.
Do you have a date yet for her to come back and review things with you?
We do not at this time. I have talked to both Commissioners Butter and to Commissioner Burns. They're willing to go ahead and start looking at these numbers because very frankly, at this stage, we probably have all the numbers we need to announce a question for the commissioners to determine how much more they want to increase what the employees pay. So we know what our costs are, and so you know, we've tried to look over the years, we've tried to stay in that 80-20 range a little bit, and that 20% that employees pays is difficult to factor in sometimes depending on how much deductibles is in the plan. And this year with the high deductible that we have those 17 people in, that's a $5,000 number there, or better plans like $750. So big difference in there. So we have areas that we can look at that it's possible we'll be making some changes in.
So did you say the largest plan that people are participating in is still the one with the lowest deductible?
The high deductible plan is $5,000.
No, that's not my question.
Okay.
Okay, people are split now between 3 different plans.
That's
the high
correct.
deductible, which
Right.
has only about 17 people in it.
Right, 17 people. Okay.
17 and a half.
Middle plan is
A little over 17.
A little over 17, thank you.
The middle plan, Jeff, don't hold me to this. The middle plan's 1,500 and our lowest is 750 in the deductible.
I understand that.
most
I'm
people-
asking about
Yeah.
participation in those
Oh,
plans. Is the one with the highest number of belly buttons the one with the lowest deductible?
I do not have that number right here that I can give you an answer to that. But I will check
Can you
that out
get
and
that?
let you know. I'll be happy to,
Thank you.
yes.
Other questions for Mr. Paust? Because I think at some point in the very near future, we're going to have to go to two plans. There's a plan, and then there's a high deductible plan.
That is
And-
what our goal is, yes.
And the sooner the better, in my opinion. But
So Jeff, going back to our budget, what did we end up with putting, because we raised it? I had down here at 250,000
Yeah,
I-
from the
that's what we raised.
4.2.
I believe that's the increase. What's our,
250.
Your
What's the
total that you
council?
have budgeted for group health insurance is 4,270,000.
Yeah,
where's the,
250.
But we increased that.
where's the
Right
council
before
budget?
election.
Right before elections. And where's election? Right after council?
It's in there, it's like pre-go.
There it
It's
is,
in there.
general fund, council.
You didn't have enough.
Okay, so it
61.
increased by $250,000
Oh, okay.
$4
Okay,
million.
that's what I thought.
20,000 to 4,270,000.
Okay.
And that may need to go up beyond that. I'm sorry. I thought we were already at 4,200,000, but it's 4,020,000.
I did too, I thought. And we did talk, and I thought you had mentioned that may have to go up to 4.5.
You know, it depends on where you think we're likely to come down in terms of the aggregate.
Right,
And, you know,
it's an unknown.
we're at essentially 90% over the last 3 or 4 years. But are we going to bet that we're getting better? Are we going to bet that we're going to have a year that's close to the average for the last 3 or 4 years? So, you know, if we go to the 90% aggregate,
Yeah, you can see
100%
what-
funding is 5.9 million. So with our 4.270 and the 880 from employees and factoring in the 1.2 million that's in reserves, that's about 100% aggregate funding. So where are we going to end up? And you know, if we get back down where our reserves are completely used up, then we're going to have to put in another infusion of cash, and that's going to be expensive in next year. For 2022, the estimates that I've heard estimate that income tax collections will be slightly lower in 2021 and lower again in 2022, just again because of the way that the state collects and then redistributes income tax and the lag time between collection and disbursement. So we'll see. We won't know for sure where we're at for a while, and how quickly will the economy bounce back after a vaccine is available and so on. So there are we're going to have to make some educated guesses on how we approach this, recognizing that eventually, you know, we've got 3.5+ million in our rainy day fund, and at some point we may have to, you know, make a decision that this is how much we're going to put in, and if we underestimate, we may have to go to the rainy day fund to bail out the plan. But that's in part, that's why it's there. when it's raining, when collections are lower than anticipated, we have that money available so that we can go to it and balance the books. Yes, sir. You're getting older.
The whole workforce is getting older.
Not only our workforce, but, you know, the county and the state in general, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's an ongoing cause.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you, Chris. Okay.
All right.
Other questions for Mr. Paust before he goes back to sleep?
All right. I'll be here.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate you pulling that together for us. That's critical information for these decisions on health insurance for us. And you'll get those questions answered and get that information back to us as soon as you can. All right, and if you would, Ken, let me know when you're going to have discussions with Kathy Dunn again, because I would like for somebody from council to be on the line. I think you did the last conversation virtually, teleconference or something, so I'd like to have somebody available.
Obviously,
Maybe more than
the choice,
one.
I think, would be President Laster to sit in, because he'll certainly have an opportunity in the 2022 pricing as we get in and look forward to that.
That's a good point. I will sit in if I'm available, yes.
Okay, very good.
All right. What else? What additional information do you need? Who do you want to hear from?
I do think it's important that we have Randy in to talk to us about some
We'll
of the
get-
issues we discussed tonight.
We'll get Randy in. Who else?
Do you want Matthew for EMA?
I think we have enough information there, but
I
if
understand.
somebody wants to talk to Matthew, we can have him in.
What do we know about public health budget yet?
I am meeting with them with a finance committee from the health department on Friday. If any of you would like to participate, we can't have a quorum there, but anybody else wants to be involved, you're welcome. Here are the major issues, I'll call them. Number one, revenue for them is they are planning for revenue to be down for a couple of reasons. And one, we anticipated where we have used for a number of years people from the health center to provide some of the services for the health department that are billable, giving immunizations, giving flu shots, doing some of the lead testing and some other things that are have historically been billed for. And so those people, we believe, will, rather than having some of those things continue to be done by the health department, will continue those things with the health center, the new entity. And so the patient visits for things like flu shots we anticipate will be down somewhat. Secondly, rather than doing all of the billing for the services that they will do, they have opted to contract with a company, I believe it's called VaxCare, Vax as in vaccinations. And so they have a contract that company will provide some of the serum for those vaccines, but they will also then take a significant percentage of any revenue for those procedures. So there'll be a combination of reduction in expenditures and a reduction in revenue. We did not have an estimate from them yet of revenue, and so we've provided them again with the revenue estimate forms. I don't know, is that the Form 3 or the Form 2? And they will be filling that out as well. So we don't anticipate that revenue for things like restaurant inspections will go down. We don't anticipate that things like providing birth certificates and death certificates will go down. In fact, they have increased. And have the commissioners approved their recommendations
We
on
have.
fees? Okay. So those fees will be going up, and the numbers escape me. It's like going from $12 to $15 or something like that. So there'll be some modest increases over time, probably in those vital records area. But in the medical activities, the revenue will probably go down. So we'll see. Where we have in the past estimated about $400,000 a year in revenue, and when we budgeted for 2020, we were kind of thinking $500,000. I know we gave them $500,000. We were thinking about $400,000 in revenue, and another 150,000 or so in reserves at the end of the year. So that made up the roughly $1 million in budget for 2020. They have turned in a preliminary report of just over $1 million. They're going to refine that. I'm sorry.
It's in there.
Okay. So it's just over $1 million. They're going to refine that, and they actually had their board approve that last week at their board meeting, but they're going to look at it again with what they're calling their finance committee, and they're going to allow me to sit in on that conversation. There's been some back and forth about some of the line items, and Pete Zaleski, our former compatriot here on the council, is on their board now, and he's part of their finance committee. Some of the question will be over whether we should include in their budget things like health insurance, which are not part of general fund departments. They're all paid out of our contribution that shows up in the budget. The general fund contribution shows up in the council budget. And they are not currently receiving a tax levy for the health department, so essentially they're funded out of general fund or other reserve funds. So again, there's conversation over should health insurance be included in the budget. I mean, to some degree, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Do we put back a levy to support those expenditures, or do we not put back a health department levy and we fund it out of general fund? So again, the health fund levy, which we have historically had, is part of the overall levy. And so if you put money into the health fund levy, it comes right out of the general fund levy. So again, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. We'll need to make some determination. Again, historically, if you recall, when the health fund and the health center fund separated, we left all of the money in the health fund and we put money into the health center fund out of the general fund. We repaid ourselves in the general fund by eliminating the health fund levy. We thought for 2 years. With all of the uncertainty of the restructuring, we continued that for this 2020 year, which would be the third year. And at this point, I'm not sure that it makes sense to try to fund this through a health levy at this point for 2021, or whether we should pay out of some reserve fund, whether it's the drawing down the general fund balance again from $9.5 million to $9 million, or whatever we determine to do. So those questions are still open. There's consideration for on their part for paying the health officer more in 2020 and 2021 than we originally agreed upon, based on the workload that's been generated from COVID. Let's face it, the health officer, when there's not a pandemic, doesn't have to do a lot. And I better be cautious here what I say, but certainly with the pandemic, the health officer has been called on much, much more than in many previous years. That's what I'm trying to say. And so one of the questions I put to Commissioner Paust was, might it be possible to compensate the health officer more out of the CARES Act dollars, because this increased workload is all based on COVID-19. So he's looking into that. You probably don't have an answer yet for me, do you?
I do not have an answer yet.
It was just in the last day or two that issue came up, and we've been trying to communicate on that. So that's where we're at. That was a very long answer to a very short question, but it continues to be a complicated issue. And again, we're working with new leadership there that, interestingly, is very willing to talk to us. So we can invite her in the next week or two, whether it's at our council meeting or at our budget meeting next Wednesday evening. Either one of those, I'm sure. She had a conflict tonight, or she would have been here tonight, but there are still a lot of balls up in the air that we're trying to sort through. She has, and this is something I worked with the previous director to try to get some of the line items into grants, and she's proposing now to move a couple of the medical positions into some of the ongoing grants for the health department. So I see that as a positive, and we'll keep working it. So let me know if you have any interest in being in on that meeting on Friday morning. And with that, are there other questions? I thought I saw a question from Gary, but I think he just turned off his hearing aid, so he doesn't have to listen to me ramble anymore. Is there any, Tony, you got a question for Ken?
Funds. Can you give us a spreadsheet next week of what has been spent and how much it's been over, so that we have a total?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Beth is working on that, and along with Kimberly and getting the numbers. To give you just a rough idea, we figure we've either spent or have committed right now about $1 million. But we'll be happy to give you a copy of that as soon as we get everything in place.
Could you take just a minute and share with council the last two major items that you got confirmed would be eligible for payment out of the CARES Act money?
Sure, I'd be thrilled to death to do that.
I'm sure you would.
Yes.
It's a Ken Powell's coup.
Yeah, well, to go clear back to the beginning and do it in about 2 seconds, originally when we acquired the current public health facility, we thought we could move right in there, but that was the beginning of monumental changes over the last year of what the new public health board decided they wanted to do in that facility. To make a long story short, as you know, we remodeled so we could move the inspection department in, and we did get that accomplished. We got all those folks moved in. Then as the Public Health Board decided to bring some other folks into that facility that originally were going to stay with the new WellCare Community Health Center, and they did not do that, so they wanted to come over here. So then that required an additional build out in that particular area. So we hired architects, got architects in to look at that, and they're in the process of doing the drawings and everything that we need to do on there. As we expanded into that facility, it continued to grow, and before we even got the drawings done, another grant came, and so we had expanded clear out into the garage we originally were going to use for storage facility that we needed, but now we look like we're going to have 2 people actually functioning out of the garage part also. Also, by expanding into the area that we were, as the architects were working with that, we did not have enough fire exits in the building. All of them were located on the south side of the building. So we have to put a fire exit on the north side of the building, and that exit will be towards the far west end of the building, and it will come out onto the sidewalk, and we have to put a handicap ramp in there also. So a lot of things kept coming along, which kept increasing the cost as we go. My concern, and good friend President Placer kept reminding, you don't have any money to do this. I said, yeah, I know, we'll keep working on that, And so through the CARES Act and working with the Indiana Finance Authority to explain to them what we were doing here and how we were going to utilize the facility for a temporary COVID-19 testing site and everything, I did get the approval to pay for all that build out through CARES Act money. And so Tony, in that area, we had put $250,000 in there roughly for that build out. So I thought I was doing pretty good at that time, and then somebody mentioned to me the first of the week, well, that is federal money, Ken, and have you been thinking that when we bid that out, that you may have to use the Bacon-Davis Act, which increases the cost considerably as they do that. And I'm going, oh my gosh. So double check that, and yes, we do have to do that. So when we finalize that, the surveying work was completed and was sent to American Structure Point for the fire exit door. And so they're going to go ahead and get that all completed and done. We do have to get permission from the state of Indiana because it's in there right away, which causes a little more slowdown on the project. So I'm pushing that as fast as I can because I have to have the project done by the end of December. And so we think right at the moment we'll be okay unless some other unforeseen complication comes along. The next project we've worked on was a mobile unit for the Public Health Department, where they could take the mobile unit out to any place within Wayne County and we could do vaccinations. We could do exams. We could do all sorts of different type of testing any place in the area. Along with that, we would want the necessary paraphernalia so that we could even hold a drive-in clinic. Let's say if we went up to Economy, up to Councilman Saunders' area there, that we could hold a mobile clinic. And we could have the signage, we could have the cones, we could have everything that we need, that we could hold a clinic up there. We could also go into the Amish community with this also. I've been in the process of trying to source the right type of vehicle for us to work with in that area. That has been a little complicated. We started out talking to Winnebago. Winnebago said we'd be happy to talk to you. It'd be about a year before we could start the project. So had to check that off the list. I did find a company in Pennsylvania called Mobile Apps, and I looked at their unit. I thought I found something that would work. They did a spatial trailer for some folks up in Alaska, and I looked at all the drawings and everything. I thought, boy, this would be about right. This ought to work good. So then I presented that to Christine, who very quickly asked me if I had ever pulled a trailer, and I said, no, I never have. And I said, why? And she said, well, you know, this is going to be an RN that will be driving this mobile unit, and trailers, the lengths that you're talking about on there are very hard to pull, also backing them up and different things, and so we really don't want that. We want a self-contained unit. We need something like an RV or a bread truck that we could go in and completely pull everything out and then rebuild. So now I'm in the process of looking for RVs or something that we could utilize. I don't think we need one of the real long RVs, but about half of that size. So that's my goal now. Also, in working with the Indiana Finance Authority, I do have the approval in hand to pay for that unit, and we're anticipating a couple of $100,000 to $250,000 for that unit at the time that we get it, and strip it and remanufacture inside everything we need for that mobile unit. So that's where we are on those two projects. I'm really pleased on both of them. They will be very, very useful. We'll be able to continue to use those after COVID-19. We hope finally does disappear in the future sometime, so those would all be permanent units here for us. So that's kind of where we are currently at that time with those two big projects. And the PPE projects, you want to talk about that? I'm sorry?
Including those two projects, you're only at $1 million?
That's correct. That's the first rough estimate that I got. I don't know. You and Beth have been, I haven't seen that. Beth gave me that rough number. She said, it looks like, Ken, you're at about $1 million. And those are the two big numbers that are in there. So that's about $500,000. Knowing what I've been paying for the masks and the different things that we've had going, the difficult one that we're looking at now that is to anticipate any payroll overtime costs that can be allocated to COVID-19. For example,
The security.
our security guard, unfortunately, our security guard, we have another person coming in now, so we're going to have an overtime cost for the next couple of weeks in that area. So those are some unknown things that happen to us when somebody gets sick or gets ill or does something, you know, so we have to have additional costs there. So some of those things we don't know. I think we'll have adequate funds available to us. We are working on the state level to try and get the December 31st date line changed over into 2021. We don't know that we'll be successful on that or not. We are working on that. The state's also working to ease up on some of the requirements of how you can utilize the funds that you have available to you. Also, the other thing that we're working on is if, for example, in our case, we had $2.1 million and we were not utilizing all those PPE dollars for that, that we could use that money for any shortfall that we might have in any of our departments due to COVID-19. So there's a lot of things kind of underway that they're talking about. Whether or not any of it ever happens remains to be seen.
So My concern from what you're sharing is that you end up with a contract for a build-out for the medical area, and then for some reason you don't get it done by whenever the money expires,
Right.
and we're on the hook for $250,000.
Well, I'm working on that through the Finance Authority, that if we're contracted for it, it's not quite completed, that it will be an authorized expenditure, yes.
Have you included the courts? You talked quite a bit about the courts and the expenses there. Is that included or not yet? Or?
Well, actually, what we have in the courts, we have about $20,000 for it is in there, for PPE equipment and for sneeze guards and different things that we have over in the courts. We've contracted with Barnheiser and Associates. We have 3 folks, that's either $3,200 or $3,700 a week in that particular case there. We get 100 hours. We have 3 full-time people that are in here. They clean on the courts, and in some cases they will have as many as 15 hearings a day. Each hearing, when that hearing is finished, those people go in and completely clean that area where that hearing was, and then the next group comes in for their hearing. Plus, any place else within the courthouse that needs to be cleaned, all the community areas over there in hallways, they clean all of those. Plus, they come over here and clean any time that we need them. For example, today, at about 4:30 today, we had a situation in which we needed to call the team in and send them to a department to do a complete sanitation in a department that we had. So it's worked very well for us as we are dealing with COVID-19. These things pop up, just like I said, at 4:30. And this evening here, while I've been working with you, I've been following the situation that we have, which has not come to conclusion yet, but it's an ongoing situation for us on a daily basis, and we have to be very flexible in what we do, and as we work with our people in all the different departments.
All right, please keep us informed.
I'll be happy to do that, very much so, yes. Thank you guys for everything you've done. Jeff's been great. We sit side by side, and we're all trying to do the best we can to get this out. And while we're talking, we might as well talk a little bit about our PPE program and the loan program. President Plaster and and Commissioner Burns are on the revolving loan fund. And
So is Mr. Gillum.
And are you on that one too, Tony? All right. I know, and Ron Cross is preparing all the paperwork on the loan, and all those are going to be made Friday. And I've been in the process of trying to collect the money from all the folks so that we have the money to actually give to the people. So I think I got about 300,000 in the last day. So I think we're on our way of getting the funding in for that program. And then the PPE program, we have either 145 or 185. I think it's 185 applications in already for PPE equipment from our websites that we have out there. And we started yesterday delivering the first batches of those, which were the floor decals and the thermometers. Passing those out, and we will be starting the first of next week with all the other supplies of delivering those throughout the area. One of the things that we're running into out of those, you ask for an address, and so we get an address of P.O. Box 110, for example. So we look at that and we think, gee, we can't deliver at that. So now we're looking at the possibility of setting up in the area over in the Kuhlman Center, in that front room there, central area where those folks that only have a box address or only are in the office 1 hour on maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of when the company Office 360 that's delivering all of this for us, and I'll give them a plug at no charge, and we really appreciate that. because this is a major undertaking to distribute all of these materials out to everybody throughout the county. And so we're really appreciative of that. But that's something new we hadn't thought of. We thought everybody to have an address we could deliver it, so we're doing that on that. And then to follow up, you got me going here. We're on TV this weekend, Saturday.
Trying to get you to wind down.
Okay, on Saturday, we've got the mask, and I understand from everybody that put it on my desk that the governor declared the state of Indiana mandatory mask. We did discuss that today at our commissioner meeting, and I did vote today 2-1 to have the county attorney draw up an ordinance indicating mandatory masks that we were going to look at and to move forward. But at this juncture, we will now wait till Monday till we get the executive order from the governor to see what all he has in that executive order, and then we'll decide what we need to do, whether we need to issue another executive order or not. But we do this Saturday. We're giving away masks from 12 to 3 at the Reed Plaza on the west side, Elstro Plaza downtown, and Test School on the east side. And each car that comes through will get 1 box of 50 masks. So we encourage you to tell everybody you know about that, to come Saturday and do that. And then also today, the 3 commissioners went to Cambridge City, and we visited the Reed Hospital site over there. And also, Beth, we looked at that area as a good possible for our distribution in the Cambridge City area. So we do want to talk to you about that so we can get something set up in Cambridge City. Then we want to do Hagerstown and Centerville also as a distribution point for masks. I think that's about it.
We're getting pretty far afield from our budget conversations.
I know.
You want to tell us about your dental appointment from last week? Or?
Well, actually, I did have a cleaning session last week, and everything was fine.
Good,
yes.
good. Could I get a motion to
Move to adjourn.
Chris motions to adjourn.
Ken, I want to go
Roger, did you second that?
I did.
All right. We're adjourned.